Welcome back to another episode of Swamp Stories. For this episode, we head up north to an area that nobody cares about. I'm actually being serious, but either way, there is some interesting history that most people don't know about. But before we get into it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. You can also follow the Instagram page as well. So let's get into it. For this video, we cover one of the most beautiful yet uninteresting regions of the country. Welcome to the Pacific Northwest. The region pretty much stretches from Oregon all the way up to Vancouver, Canada. And for those of you who've never been here, it's really strange, especially if you're from California. The sun never comes out and it rains all year round. For most of us who like good weather, we would be miserable there. However, believe it or not, everyone isn't like us, and some people enjoy overcast weather. So since the very start, the Pacific Northwest has attracted a very particular kind of person. People who don't smile when you walk by, don't say thank you when you hold the door, and lock their doors when they see someone who doesn't look like them. These are the kinds of people who have willingly moved to an expensive region with atrocious weather. And because of this, the Pacific Northwest has gained an extremely unfriendly and miserable reputation. However, it's really more specific to two cities, Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. I covered Seattle in a previous video, but didn't really talk about the area in context. So let me break it down. Since the very start, Seattle has been a wealthy city. From the gold rush in the early 1900s, the Boeing boom in the 1950s, and of course the new age tech boom in the 1980s. And for those of you who don't know, Bill Gates founded Microsoft in Seattle in 1979. Then came Starbucks, Nordstrom's, and most importantly Amazon. And with the massive growth of companies, major high-paying jobs have flooded the area since the start. Well, that's Seattle, which is pretty much the San Francisco of the North. Extreme wealth, glamour, and entitled. However, this doesn't represent the whole metro area. So let's take a 40-minute trip down I-5. During this drive, you'll go from seeing Teslas, vegan cafes, and bored soccer moms to seeing the unexpected. The depression and despair start to sink in once you reach the town of Tukwila, and as you get further from Seattle, it only seems to get worse. Finally, you enter the city of Tacoma, the Oakland of the North. Well, that's according to them and their standards. The point is that Tacoma just isn't very nice. It's always been seen as Seattle's poor little cousin. Like if all things go bad, you can always move to Tacoma and rent a cheap apartment and just give up on life. So it's safe to say that Tacoma has always had a bad reputation up north. Some of it is just classism from snobby Seattle, but a lot of it comes from an aspect that you would never expect. So in order for this to make sense, let's head to the year 1985. As we all know, LA was in its roughest decade. Chaos and madness ruled the streets of South Central Compton and Watts for quite some time. So hundreds of LA families began moving all the way up to the Pacific Northwest. Some went to Portland, others went to Seattle, and a whole lot went to Tacoma. Portland and Seattle were expensive, and Tacoma was the perfect place for those who wanted to create their own financial future. Yes, it was lower class, but that meant that it was cheap. Well, shortly after arriving, the new residents discovered a gold mine. Okay, not a literal gold mine, but they found a completely untapped market. And with their LA street connections, it was too easy for many to pass up. Long story short, Tacoma was a poor city that had a lot of hopeless individuals who wanted a way out of their reality. And the LA residents had access to what could be a temporary solution. So the I-5 became a major corridor between LA and Tacoma, where all kinds of things were being brought up north. At first, the city had no idea what was going on, but all the LA transplants were living large. And once the word spread around LA, thousands of people began moving up north. So eventually, every LA neighborhood had representation in Tacoma. And naturally, this made things kind of awkward. They were so used to being organized that they had no idea how to operate in this new environment. So to get everyone in order, two twin brothers decided to organize. That would be Diamond and Malone Boyd, and they happened to live on 23rd and MLK, right in the heart of the Hilltop neighborhood. So together they formed the Hilltop CRIPS. It started with a dozen or so members, but quickly expanded. The Hilltop neighborhood is located on the northeast side of the city, and just like the name, it's on a hill. The area looks just like the Hillside neighborhood in Vallejo. If you've been to both places, you know that they look identical. They're both clearly middle-class suburban areas that took a left turn. Anyways, as the LA LA guys claimed the Hilltop as their territory, other groups in Tacoma formed as well. Just 10 minutes away, LA Pyrus formed on the east side. And here is where things fell apart. 1988. At this point, Tacoma was like a bubble ready to burst at any moment. Tensions were naturally really high, but everyone was just there to make money. All it was going to take was one bad decision. And here is how the story goes. The Hilltop and East Side started bumping heads over money, and the Hilltop members wanted to send a message. August 28th, 1988. 3 Hilltop members drive down to the East Side on 47th and K, a known Pyru hangout spot. That's where they spot 5 people outside. Thankfully, everything was okay, but the East Side was completely shocked. No one expected anything like this to occur in their new city. So later that day, the East Side wanted to send a message back. 8 p.m. 5 Eastsiders get in their SUV. Brian Allen, Terrace Miller, Nathaniel Miles, Daryl Lee, and Anthony Rawls. They arrive in the Hilltop neighborhood and drive around. And on 23rd and Sheridan, they spot a man named Bernard Houston sitting in his car. Bang. This was officially Tacoma's very first tragedy of this sort. Yes, you heard that correctly. The first in the history of Tacoma. And unfortunately, it would not be the last. In fact, it sparked off a wild decade. The city went from 0 bodies in 1987 to 28 in 1989 alone. And that may not seem like a lot, but Tacoma only has 200,000 residents. So in reality, it was far worse than you can imagine. The sudden trend concerned everyone in Tacoma, and maybe a little too much in one case. And that introduces us to a man named Bill Folk. Bill happens to be an Army Ranger located at Fort Lewis, and with his small salary, he decided to purchase a home for just $10,000 cash. The house is located on Ash Street, right in the heart of the Hilltop. However, because the area looks decent, Bill had no clue what he was getting himself into. As soon as he moved in, he began noticing all kinds of suspicious activity, and as a response, he decided to start videotaping everything in the neighborhood. He thought that this wouldn't be a big deal, he's just a good citizen playing his role. However, this was a new Tacoma. September 23rd, 1989. Bill decides to host a neighborhood barbecue in front of his house with a bunch of fellow Rangers. The idea is to show neighborhood unity against the bad activities, and unfortunately, the Hilltop Crips are not a fan. 3 p.m. A group of Hilltop members pull up to the barbecue in their car. The driver rolls down his window, points his finger at Bill, and says boom boom. And a few hours later, they come back, but this time with rocks and all kinds of threats. So in response, Bill calls up his fellow Rangers at Fort Lewis to come as soon as possible. 15 Rangers in total, and they all take positions inside of Bill's house. 9:20 p.m. A car slowly turns the corner onto Ash Street, and as it approaches, it turns its lights off. So in return, from his upstairs window, Bill orders his fellow Rangers to shut off all the lights in the house. And here is where things get controversial. One of the sides initiates and things get hectic. 15 Rangers against dozens of Hilltop members. It lasted for 10 minutes, but thankfully everyone was okay. Or at least that's what they thought. However, that same night, some men arrived at a Seattle hospital an hour away. To this day, no one knows if these two things were connected. Well, after this, all of the blame was put on the Hilltop members. However, even today, the Hilltop community claims that Bill initiated the entire situation. I guess we will never know the truth. But either way, this story made the national news. And because of this, Tacoma's mayor Gene Moss wanted to send a message. So instantly, the DA filed cases against a bunch of Hilltop members, but most notably the co-founder Malone Boyd. In 1990, Malone Boyd received 24.5 years for distribution. Yes, you heard that correctly, 24.5 years. Some say this was compensation for how little Tacoma was solving in general. It seemed like no one would ever talk and everyone would get away with what they did. And for that reason, the 1990s were completely out of control. Every single day was wild, and that's why Seattle began calling Tacoma Tacompton. It became the city where everyone would raise their eyebrows if you said you lived there. It really became the last resort city in the Pacific Northwest. If all else failed, you could always go to Tacoma. Well, over the next couple of decades, nothing interesting came out of the region. However, in 2009, a very interesting story came back up. If we head back to the first story of Hilltop's Bernard Houston, remember that none of the 5 men ever went down for it. So let me break it down. After this incident, all of the men went their separate ways. Nathan Miles, also known as Tex, became a landscaper in Steilacoom, Washington. Brian Allen moved to Vancouver and became a Canadian citizen. And there he became a personal trainer, community rec director, and happily married. So it's safe to say that those two turned their lives around after making mistakes. And for the other 3, well, they happened to be in the system for other incidents. And here is where things get interesting. In early 2009, a man decided to call Tacoma police anonymously. He claimed that he was cellmates with Brian Allen and Anthony Rawls in the early 1990s. He then proceeded to say that both of them had admitted to the incident that took the life of Bernard Houston. The man said that his conscience wouldn't let him hold it in any longer. So directly after this, Rawls and Allen went down. Brian Allen happened to be vacationing in Mexico with his wife when he got the news. Well, eventually all 5 men got life. And this brought up an interesting question. Does justice have a shelf life? Despite 21 years passing, the family of Bernard Houston was grateful and happy to finally get this result. However, the families of the 5 men thought differently, specifically for the 2 who were leading productive lives. Personally, I'm not sure what's wrong or right, but what do you guys think? Solving this was a big deal because this incident caused everything in Tacoma history. So this was big news for Tacoma's DA, and he wouldn't stop there. In 2010, they successfully took down 36 Hilltop members for all kinds of events. However, there was really nothing that serious. But despite this, the average sentence in the takedown was 22 years. After reading this, I was shocked, so I went ahead and did some research. Apparently, Seattle is known for a super lenient justice system, and Tacoma is the total opposite. Everyone in the area knows to tighten up when they're driving through Tacoma. Well, that takes us to the new era of Hilltop. These days, Tacoma is pretty quiet. Well, that's not entirely true, but Tacoma is definitely not to Compton anymore. It's more like to San Diego instead. Anyways, Hilltop is represented by a few rappers: Bluey Sparks, Blue Flame Veli, and V Real. So you might be wondering who Hilltop is rivals with. And at this point, it's everyone in Tacoma. Sadly, it's even people that they used to be allied with. The old Eastside Pyrus are pretty much gone now, and the area is pretty nice. So instead, Hilltop is rivals with an area known as Knockout. The Knockout Crips are located between 47th and 56th, but mostly hang out on 47th. But due to the area being expensive now, many of the members established themselves in a suburb south of Tacoma called Lakewood. And here, Knockout claim 100th down to 119. Then next, you have the 96 GDs located in South Tacoma off of 96. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, the Pacific Northwest definitely has the least intimidating people I've ever seen. But unfortunately, looks can be deceiving. May 2nd, 2017, rapper Blue Flame Veli is getting his hair cut at a barbershop in nearby Lakewood. Due to the rivalry, this is a risky place to get a haircut for him. However, he stays low-key. Well, little does he know, 2 fellow Hilltop members are there as well, but hiding in the parking lot. Jesse Hinton and Charles McKee, 2 of his close friends. Well, after the haircut, Veli gets up and heads to his car, but right there are the men. Bang! This incident shook the Hilltop community because everyone involved were close friends. Sometimes you have to watch the ones closest to you and peep their energy. Thankfully, Veli made it, but this wouldn't be the end of problems for Hilltop rappers. February 11th, 2018. It's a Friday night and Neff the Pharaoh and OMB Peasy have a show in South Seattle. And for those of you who don't know, Seattle and Tacoma love Northern California music. It's the #1 region outside of California that listens to California music. So any Bay Area rapper is going to draw a big crowd in Seattle. Well, at the show, Hilltop rapper Bluey Sparks is set to open up for them. So he goes on stage, performs, and this is where things get dicey. Some say he was on stage and others say that it was after his performance. But somebody in the club was looking for him. Bang! To this day, no one really knows why it happened or who did it, and it remains as one of the strangest stories in Seattle history. But don't be deceived, overall 2018 and 2019 were extremely quiet in Tacoma. In fact, they were the 2 safest years since 1987. But since 2020, everything has risen back to 1990s levels. Of course, most of the chaos has something to do with the Hilltop. Why the sudden wave, I don't know, but if you know, let me know in the comments. Well, that's gonna do it for this episode of Swamp Stories. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Peace!